Welcome back to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Mae, and this week's episode is on the deep and powerfully impactful and transformative work of healing the inner child.
Hello, this is the Mae B Mindful Podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in.
And so I see a lot of conversation about this. And in certain circles, there's very, very deep work and a lot of proactive work. But sometimes it's one of those subjects that is talked about and understood on a cerebral level, but is not actually necessarily being internalized and integrated by everybody, and therefore kind of is just a nice idea. I'm just going to plead my case really for why I think that this is in fact the most incredible gift that anybody can really give themselves. It is hands down the most profound gift I've ever given to myself, and I'll tell you why. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens if we don't. Maybe I'll start by agitating you guys and tell you a little bit about that. And then what happens when we do? And then why we don't. I think why oftentimes people just avoid this work. And I get it. I really do get it. But it's really worth showing up for. First of all, if we don't heal, we basically see an interpretation of life through a lens of pain. In other words, that's not life. That's an interpretation of life. That's a lie. And we all have our interpretations, and we all have our filters, and we all have our protective mechanisms, right? But if we don't heal the child can't grow up because they stay the child. That makes sense. We don't get to be the adult if we don't heal the child, because what will happen is the unmet need of the child, because children are really, really good at this, they show up again and again. They keep showing up to get their need met. So even if we ignore them and we lock them in the basement of ourselves and just shut them down and try and hush them, eventually that pain will overflow and they will flood our system again. And we won't necessarily interpret it as like my inner child is flooding my system, but that is really what's happening. Because if we don't heal these parts of us, then what happens is these wounded parts of us show up and these protective parts end up forming. And these protective parts, while they are a part of us, and they do need to be acknowledged and they do need to be heard and validated, they are not the true self. Our wounded parts are not our true self. So we are not able to fully show up authentically and live the life that we're here for and be free to do that if we don't get free of those filters and those lenses. Because what happens is when those parts show up and they flood our systems, they're flooding our system from an old energy in it, and we essentially become that part that's frozen in time. So it's not based, we're not seeing reality in that moment. And it feels real because the energy is real, but it's not necessarily based on our current circumstances or the reality. And so oftentimes, as the child does, we misinterpret, and the child misinterprets because they had a limited tool set and skill set if they were not provided with those. And a lot of us just weren't. And why weren't we? Because we had humans as parents, and humans fall short. They just do. I've told my kids before, I love you guys. I don't ever want to hurt you. I don't ever want to hurt you. But I know I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm really sorry. I'm just going to apologize in advance. Please know that even though I'm going to fall short and I might let you down, it's not because of you, and it's not because I want to. It's because I'm human. And it's because I'm not your ultimate parent. In the end, you're my brother, you're my sister. I've told my children this. Hopefully I didn't traumatize them. They thought it was curious, actually. I think they really appreciated it. They really gave me a big hug, and I had the heart moment with them when I told them this, I remember. But I do remember it going in, and they were like, oh, yeah, you're my parent, but you're not my parent. And some of the best work that we can do, and really the work that we do here in reparenting ourselves, is becoming our own parent and letting go of those attachments and those failed ideals that our parents were not able to meet. Because, I mean, maybe they were in some regards, in some ways, and we find acceptance and love for our parents because they did the best they could. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I know for me, the thing that has been the most powerful has been accepting, letting go. It's been the journey to compassion. But in that journey, we have to find compassion for ourselves first, because we can't find compassion for someone else until we find it for ourselves. So we really have to meet ourselves wherever we're needing to meet ourselves, whatever is going on for us. And so it's an incredible process of opening and building a relationship with ourselves. And, I would say that all of our pain and all of our loss of self comes back to a severing of true self, where these woundings and fear and things came in and slowly but surely, bit by bit, cut us off from ourself. And the journey and healing the child and the spiritual journey is really about the journey inward and reaccessing ourself and our true self and our true nature. But in order to do that, we have to get through a lot of various wreckage or layers or things that feel scary or overwhelming. And so it takes courage. And I don't actually believe it's possible to do. And this is just me. Other people might have a different experience. People that are very science minded and all about all the modalities, right? Which I am too. I think there's some incredible modalities. But I think that ultimately, I can't figure it out. I can get lost in the maze. I've talked about this a little bit, where we can get lost in the maze of ourselves because we're so complex. And there's so much that we don't understand about ourselves. But the higher self, which is very much in alignment with Creator, can see things from a higher perspective when it's in alignment with the divine and that energy. It can accept and allow that energy in. So I personally don't believe this is possible to do without spiritual assistance, because depending on your experience and your degree of trauma or things that you're having to move into or move up against, or depending also on your own level of sensitivity, it can just feel too difficult and overwhelming, and we won't face it unless we know that we're going to be held, that we're going to be covered, and that we have support. And yes, we can connect with other fellows who are on this journey, who can support us, and that's been an incredible gift, to be able to connect with other people like that, which you do when you're on this path. And yes, we do that for ourselves. This is about taking responsibility and ownership for ourselves and removing the responsibility and stepping out of victim in order to take ownership and show up for ourselves, and to really, recognize that the work is ours. It's not about anybody else changing or anything like that. But at the end of the day, there is a good amount of surrender that has to happen. And for me, and for a lot of people, that surrender, we're not going to do that unless we know something's really got us, And so there is that spiritual component, which for me has been the game changer. And so it's one thing to talk about this. You can go to therapy and you can sit in therapy for a decade and talk about this stuff, and people can pontificate on I've done it. I've had a conversation about what I could say to my inner child, but until I actually sit down and write her a letter and maybe do some non-dominant handwriting and allow her to respond and allow space for her to speak into whatever she brings, and be open and willing for her to flood my system temporarily. If it's too much, I can stop. But to allow that space for her to be heard, that's everything. Because when we feel heard, when we feel seen, when we feel acknowledged, then the need can be met. And sometimes that's all we're needing. And maybe that's what was missing. So we get to show up for ourselves and provide those things for ourselves and meet those needs that weren't adequately met. If they weren't adequately met, since they are basic human needs for survival, then, we're going to stay needy. And the incredible thing is once a need is met, it dissolves. It's no longer there. And when we consistently show up for ourselves, and so this is how we do this and we integrate this change, because it's one thing, like I said, to talk about it. It's another thing to integrate it and to practice it. So how do we do this? How do we show up for ourselves and integrate this change? We do this through consistency, because this is what builds trust. So we're reconnecting, we're opening a conduit of communication with ourselves, with the self that we have been cut off from, that has been severed, that we have most likely self-abandoned as a result of not wanting to face unresolved emotions and energies. And that's why people avoid doing the work, actually. It's because they don't know what to do with the kid. They're like, I got this kid, and this kid's got this buildup of emotions that doesn't have any tools to do anything with. And I don't have the tools because nobody's taught me, because I was the kid. So it's a learning process. It is overwhelming. The energy is real, but the energy can't hurt you. So we do this through showing up for ourselves unapologetically and relentlessly. And I don't mean for that to sound aggressive, but consistently, I guess. Because if the kid knows you're there, the kid starts to trust you. And I've practiced this with my children before, when I was practicing some hand-in-hand techniques with special time and providing a space. The child will start to bring emotions. When they know the space is held, they will bring a little more. You'll gain a little more trust. They'll bring a little more. They know you're listening. They're like, okay, this person's listening to me. This grown-up is listening to me, can hold space for me. And guess what? The grown-up doesn't have to fix it for me. And that's the incredible thing about it, is that we don't fix it. We don't have to fix anything, because nothing's broken, nothing's wrong. We show up, we hold space. We are self-healing organisms, and so our bodies know how to process and resolve this as long as space is held, as long as it is allowed. And that's in fact how we dissolve this, is by allowing. We don't get in there with a screwdriver and a toolkit. We literally show up, we hold space. So with a child, when you hold space and allow a child to process their emotion, yes, it might look messy. They might have to have a tantrum. Yes, you might not know what to do with them, and they might scream, I hate you. But if you say consistently, I'm here, I love you. No, I'm not going to let you hurt me. I can't let you hurt me. I love you. I'm not going to let you hurt yourself. You're not going to feel good about yourself if you do that. You're better than that. And guess what? They get all their fucking feelings out and they feel better. And then they get up and they're like, okay, I'm going to go play on the slide now. And you're like, whoa. And that's real. I've seen it with my kids over and over again. I'm like, okay, my work is done for now. Now I need to go process and recover, because that was intense. The only thing that's intense about it is thinking that you have to do something to change it or fix it. It's a lie. Nothing's wrong. We were led to believe that feelings were bad or wrong. They're not. They serve a beautiful purpose. They do need to be heard, though. The simple explanation is, you don't have to do anything. You just show up and you trust the process, because we're beautifully designed. And we didn't put that energy there. We didn't do that. And so it's not our job to remove it. I know I've talked about not having a hyper focus on this, because that can also become an obsession, and we can also get stuck in the wound. And so when it comes to dissolving some of these negative beliefs, some of these things, there's a ton of tools, but the day-to-day consistent stuff is speaking to ourselves differently and holding space for ourselves and being attentive to whatever's coming up. So as far as the negative self-talk or the criticism, where we might talk down to ourselves and compound that negative belief or disconnection that we're having and further degrade and diminish, we can show up with an antidote statement. Very simple. It feels a little weird at first if people aren't used to doing this, but to literally show up and speak the antidote, to speak the opposite, which would look like, for example, if you say something really mean about yourself and you have a judgment, even if you say it in your head, wow, that really sucked. You did a shit job at that. To self-correct in that moment and say, I see you. I'm really proud of you and you're working really hard and you're new at this, or whatever, whatever the antidote is. And I'm just going to tell you, you do that a few times, you start to dismantle some of this stuff pretty quickly because we believe ourselves. We do. And it begins to shift things. Now, as far as going into the hardwiring, which is where this stuff is at its core, we really need to go subconscious to do this. We can't do this with the conscious mind. Journaling can be helpful, but oftentimes that's not going to do the trick ultimately. There's a lot of like mindfulness tools. Those aren't going to transform it. Those can support you. They're not going to transform it. Therapy can support you. It's not going to transform it. We have to go subconscious. We got to go sub, okay? Because that's where it is. So unless we reach it on the plane that it is, unless we reclaim ourselves where we are, we don't. It's just that simple. What I've found to be most effective for this is hypnosis work, is the self-hypnosis practice that I teach. And conversational hypnosis, which is like, pow, just absolutely incredible, that my mentor taught me and did some sessions with me that dissolved things in one session that I had been up against trying to chisel away at and hammer at and figure out for decades. We did it in one session. In fact, it was so powerful that I was angry after. I was like, what do you mean? I've been trying to figure this out for like 15 years. What do you mean we just solved it and it just left my body? It was like that. I mean, age regression is really powerful and we can do that in hypnosis too, but we don't always have to go digging into the trauma. We don't have to go looking for it. And this is a mistaken belief that we have to go into the wound and go live in the wound, and we don't. Sometimes we do, and we have to face it, and we have to move through a mourning process or grieve and acknowledge, but we don't have to live there, because that can become actually very self-indulgent, and then we create a bigger problem for ourselves. And of course, spiritual practices are incredible tools. 12-step is so powerful. The rooms of Coda and ACA and SLA, they're so powerful for healing the inner child. I have really found my home in some of those rooms and my people. And it's just an incredible thing to be able to have the support from people that have gone before you, who are on the other side of it, who have transformed it themselves, and to be able to help you become fluent in that conversation with yourself. And when we do this and we get on track with ourselves and we reestablish that connection and we re-access our true energy, like, watch out, you're powerful, like anything is possible, and we don't have to fall into the same negative cycles and patterns that manifest as a result of being wounded, which are coping mechanisms and strategies that oftentimes are harmful and compound those wounds. And I've talked about that a lot. And that can manifest from just getting into toxic, harmful relationships to all kinds of bad habits and addictions and disassociative strategies that one really begins to be driven by, that they're not choosing consciously, but that they're driven by. And that's really what addiction is. It's a state of being truly driven. And, as far as dissolving the energy, and as far as like why people don't want to do this, it's like I mentioned, it's like, okay, what do I do with this kid, right? And so the other thing that I didn't mention is parts work. And there's a lot of curiosity and nuances with curiosity and compassion, and in opening up this dialogue with our parts and ourselves, and getting all members of our inner family system like on the same page, so that we can feel like, okay, we're all in this together. Like, we don't need to have so much schism and split within, because that's really what happens, is there's a split in our psyche when this happens, and then there's an imbalance, and then as a result of that imbalance, then we crave balance. So then that's why it manifests harmfully usually, and we go out into the world expecting other false pseudo solutions to like create that balance for us. But of course they can't do the trick, because those are external solutions for an internal problem. We're talking about energy, we're talking about spirit here. And so we have to heal. And when we heal, we come into alignment. It's the most incredible, powerful thing. We come into alignment, we get to live the life, the fully aligned, purpose-filled, with divine purpose filled life, service. I just said a lot of words at once, and I don't know if they made sense together. But they're all synonymous, but you know what I'm trying to say. We get to be set free, be liberated, and we don't have to stay stuck. We don't have to stay like restless, and we don't have to stay discontented or dissatisfied. Healing is a process. Healing's a little uncomfortable. What we make of it in our minds is worse. When we're present and we show up and we just put one foot in front of the other, incredible things happen. And these small steps that we take towards ourselves result in big results and big change and sustainable change and transformation. So I hope I covered all my points. I love you guys. Be well.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at Mae B Mindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,